Today, we are diving into a summary of a truly gripping story, Erik Larson's The Demon of Unrest, a saga of hubris, heartbreak, and heroism at the dawn of the Civil War.
So, to really get a handle on how this all happened, we're going to walk through the story in 6 parts. We'll start with the very first cracks in the nation and follow it all the way to the final shots that kicked off the war.
All right, first up, we need to set the scene. How does an entire nation get to the point where it's teetering right on the edge of its own destruction?
It all really kicks off when Lincoln's elected in November 1860, and his victory is like a political earthquake. You see, Southern elites were already convinced that the North was out to strangle slavery. So for them, Lincoln's win felt like the beginning of their own cultural extinction. You had figures like James Hammond and Edmund Ruffin who weren't just defending slavery as an economic system. No, they saw it as the moral and social foundation of their entire way of life. And their rhetoric, it was fierce, it was apocalyptic, and it was deeply, deeply personal.
And right in the middle of this growing storm, you've got President James Buchanan, just torn between the two sides. He's completely paralyzed by indecision, and his big plan is to just wait out the crisis. Well, that doesn't calm things down at all. It just makes the chaos worse and leaves this huge leadership vacuum right when it was needed the most.
And this really captures the feeling of the time perfectly. The country finds itself in this strange, in-between place. Not yet at war, but you certainly couldn't call it peace anymore.
All that simmering tension, well, it doesn't stay contained for long. Next, let's look at how the idea of secession just caught fire and started spreading like wildfire across the South.
South Carolina is the first domino to fall. Its decision to secede gives others the courage to follow suit. And these secession conventions, they become these theaters of pure emotion. You have leaders talking about a heroic stand for liberty, all while defending the enslavement of millions. It's a staggering contradiction, for sure. But in that kind of superheated atmosphere, emotion was way more powerful than logic.
And we're not just talking about rhetoric here. The country's actual institutions start to buckle. The whole system, built for debate and compromise, it just collapses under the weight of all this mistrust. The demon of unrest stops being a metaphor. It becomes a real, living force that's driving crowds, fueling newspapers, and taking over entire legislatures.
But history isn't just about these big, abstract forces. It's made by people. So let's zoom in on some of the key individuals who are caught right in the center of this storm. This is something the author, Larson, does incredibly well. He weaves these intimate human stories into the grand narrative. And a perfect example is Mary Boykin Chestnut. She's a brilliant and conflicted planter's wife, and she really becomes one of the book's emotional anchors. Her diary entries give us this incredible look into a society that's steeped in privilege but also haunted by guilt. She observes all the hypocrisy of slaveholding society with this sharp, often painful clarity. Through her eyes, we see the South not as just one thing, but as a place full of internal contradictions, where loyalty, fear, pride, and a deep moral unease are all just churning together.
Meanwhile, the president-elect, Lincoln, is watching all this from a distance. He's painfully aware that any misstep could ignite a war. He refuses to compromise on the expansion of slavery, but he's also trying to avoid provoking the South. Larson portrays him as a man of deep conviction, but also one experiencing profound loneliness. The weight of a fracturing union is resting on his shoulders long before he even takes the oath of office.
And then, on the other side, you've got figures like Edmund Ruffin. He's an elderly firebrand who becomes a symbol of the South's defiance. Driven by ideology and a fierce, almost religious devotion to Southern honor, he travels around agitating with this missionary zeal, pushing the nation toward the very catastrophe he claims he's trying to prevent.
And all of this tension, all of this human drama, it all comes to a focus on a single, isolated spot, a fort, sitting in a harbor.
Fort Sumter becomes the symbolic heart of the whole crisis. And the man in command, Major Robert Anderson, is a loyal Kentuckian and a former slaveholder. His own personal conflict, loyalty to the Union versus sympathy for the South, perfectly mirrors the nation's.
The fort itself is isolated, undermanned, and they're running out of supplies. The leaders in Charleston see it as an intolerable insult, its federal authority planted defiantly right in their harbor. Every single day that Sumter remains under the U.S. flag is a reminder that their secession is not yet a done deal.
So how did this tense standoff turn into an all-out war? Well, the path was paved by a cascade of errors, and it shows how even small mistakes can lead to absolutely monumental consequences.
This timeline really shows you just how fast everything escalated. Lincoln gets elected in November, and that's the trigger. In just 5 months, the country goes from a political crisis to the first shots of the Civil War. It is a shockingly short path to conflict. This whole period is a study in tragic human error. Letters arrive late. Orders get misunderstood. Buchanan's own cabinet fractures. Southern leaders completely misread Lincoln's intentions, while Northern leaders totally underestimate Southern resolve. Larson shows how history often turns not on some grand strategy, but on all these small failures, on hesitations, delays, and false assumptions. The crisis becomes this slow-motion disaster, with each side completely convinced the other is acting in bad faith. By early 1861, Fort Sumter is literally starving. Anderson's men are rationing food, they're patching up crumbling walls, and they're just waiting for relief that might never come. Lincoln has to decide whether to send supplies. If he does, it could mean war. If he doesn't, he's basically surrendering federal authority. At the same time, Confederate leaders are debating whether to attack. Some argue for patience, others insist that striking first is the only way to assert their legitimacy. The tension is just unbearable. The entire nation is suspended between two futures, one of fragile peace and the other of inevitable war.
And then, Confederate forces open fire on Fort Sumter. The bombardment lasts for 34 hours. Anderson's men endure the whole thing with incredible discipline and restraint. And amazingly, no one is killed in the battle. But the symbolic impact is enormous. The attack electrifies the North, and Lincoln immediately calls for 75,000 volunteers. The South rallies behind the Confederacy, and those last threads of compromise, they finally snap. And just like that, the Civil War begins. It starts not with a bloody massacre, but with a calculated act of political theater that instantly transforms an abstract conflict into a very real war.
So, what does a story from over 150 years ago mean for us now? Well, this final section of our explainer connects the past directly to our present. The fall of Sumter is like the first domino in a long, long chain. Suddenly, there is no more middle ground. Border states are forced to choose sides. Families are split apart, and newspapers just erupt with fury. In the North, the attack unites the public behind Lincoln, while in the South, it solidifies their new identity as a separate nation. Larson closes by reflecting on just how fragile democratic institutions can be. Those few months between November 1860 and April 1861 show how quickly a society can unravel when fear, pride, and misinformation completely overpower reason. The book really becomes a warning. Nations don't just fall apart suddenly, they erode slowly, and then they collapse all at once. So Larson's narrative isn't just history. It's a study of political psychology, of leadership under pressure, and of the human capacity for both incredible courage and total self-deception. And the book resonates so much today because it shows how polarization, distrust, and a kind of moral blindness can push even a stable republic toward disaster.